Victor Salazar pressed the small glass vial into his man's palm and smiled like a man who had already won. "Under the table," he said quietly. "Right side, where he always sits." The man nodded without a word. No hesitation, no remorse. Just the practiced calm of someone who had done terrible things before and would do them again before morning. Salazar straightened his tie, lifted his wineglass, and let his eyes drift across the dining room of Pier's Edge restaurant with the satisfaction of a man who believed he was untouchable. Across the table, Adrian Kovac laughed at something one of his lieutenants said. He had no idea the last hour of his life had already begun. If this kind of story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Lena Varelli had worked at Pier's Edge for 6 years, and in those 6 years, she had learned one thing above all others. The most dangerous people in any room were always the quietest ones. She had learned to read a table the way other people read faces. The way a man held his fork told her whether he was nervous or arrogant. The way he ordered wine told her whether he was trying to impress someone or trying to forget someone. The way he looked at the waitstaff told her whether he saw people or furniture. Most of the men who came through Pier's Edge on nights like this one saw furniture. She was 28 years old and had been invisible for most of them. Tonight started the same as every other private event night. Marco, the floor manager, had pulled her aside near the service corridor before the first guests arrived. His forehead was damp. That was never a good sign. "Lena," he said, keeping his voice low even though they were alone, "I need you on the main floor tonight, tables 1 through 6, but I need you to understand something first." "Okay," she said. "You don't hear anything tonight. You don't see anything. You fill glasses, you clear plates, and you keep your eyes down. Can you do that?" She looked at him steadily. "Marco, I do that every night." He didn't laugh. He pressed his lips together and nodded like a man convincing himself of something. Good, that's good. Just stay calm. Whatever you see up there, stay calm." He walked away before she could ask what she might see. Lena tied her apron tighter and picked up her first tray. The main floor of Pier's Edge was already half full by the time she stepped through the double doors. The restaurant had been booked for a private gathering, not unusual. This happened 3 or 4 times a year when the usual clientele gave way to a different kind of guest entirely. The kind who arrived in black cars with tinted windows. The kind whose security men waited near the exits and watched every person who moved through the room with eyes that never quite relaxed. She knew who these men were. Everyone in New York with any sense knew who they were. She just didn't ever expect to be standing 6 feet from 2 of them at the same time. Adrian Kovac was already seated at the head table when she first crossed the room. She recognized him, not from any photograph, but from the way the room reorganized itself around him. Waiters gave him slightly more space than they gave anyone else. The security men near the far wall kept one eye on the door and one eye on him at all times. Even the other guests men who ran things. Men who were not small in any city. They walked in to position themselves just slightly away from him, the way iron filings arrange themselves around a magnet without being told to. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with a stillness about him that Lena associated with people who had spent years being the most dangerous person in any room and had stopped needing to prove it. Across the table from Kovac, Victor Salazar held his wineglass loosely and smiled too much. That was the first thing Lena noticed about him. He smiled the way people smile when they're performing contentment rather than feeling it. His eyes moved constantly, touching every face in the room and sliding off again, never settling, always calculating. She had seen that look before, not on men like Salazar. She had seen it on her brother Danny, back when he was still using back in the months before everything fell apart. It was the look of a person whose mind was always 3 moves ahead of their mouth. She didn't trust it then. She didn't trust it now. Lena moved through the room the way she always did, efficiently, quietly, with the unhurried precision that made good waitstaff invisible. She refilled glasses at tables 2 and 3, collected empty bread plates, checked in with the kitchen about the timing on the second course. She was a machine when she worked. She had trained herself to be. It was the only way to survive a place like this. It was table 4 that first made her slow down. 2 men she didn't recognize were seated there closer to the wall than the window, dressed well but not quite right. The suits were good but worn with the stiffness of men who didn't usually wear them. One of them had his right hand resting on the tablecloth in a way that struck her as forced, like he was deliberately keeping it visible, like he was reminding himself to keep it visible. She refilled their water without making an eye contact and moved on. But something stayed with her. At table 5, a man was on his phone, his back to the room, his voice lower than it needed to be. She caught half a word as she passed, not enough to mean anything, but the tension in his shoulders said everything. By the time she reached the edge of the head table, Lena had cataloged a dozen small wrongnesses about the evening, the way she had once cataloged the wrong sounds in her mother's apartment when she was a child, and knew before she opened the door that something bad had already happened inside. She approached the head table to refill the wine. Kovac was speaking to the man on his left, something low and unhurried, and his hands rested on the edge of the table with the easy weight of a man completely comfortable in his surroundings. Salazar was nodding at something one of his own people had said, his smile still going, his eyes still moving. Lena reached across to refill the glass, closest to her one of the junior men, not Kovac himself, and as she leaned forward, she felt it. Her forearm grazed the underside of the table, just barely. Just the inside of her wrist against the smooth wood edge, and then something else. Something that wasn't wood, something slightly oily against her skin. She kept moving. She finished the pour. She pulled back smoothly and turned toward the next glass, and it was only then walking the 3 steps toward the service station along the wall that she felt the smell register. It hit the back of her throat like a memory. Bitter almonds. Her hand stopped moving. She stood at the service station with an empty wine bottle in her hand, and her heart doing something that wasn't quite beating so much as lurching. And the smell was still there, clinging to the inside of her wrist where she had touched the underside of the table. Not strong, not enough to knock her over, but enough for someone who knew what it was. The last time she had smelled that particular combination, the bitterness, the faint chemical sweetness underneath, she had been 18 years old, and she had found her brother Danny on the floor of his apartment, barely breathing, his skin the wrong color, his lips going blue. The doctor at the hospital had explained it to her afterward. He had been thorough, almost too thorough, as if he believed that understanding something was the same as surviving it. He had told her about cyanide compounds, about how quickly they worked, about how the smell was distinctive if you knew what to look for, but that most people walked right past it because they had never had reason to learn. She had had reason. She had stood in a hospital hallway at 18 and learned everything she never wanted to know. And now she was standing in a restaurant at 28 holding an empty wine bottle with that smell on her skin. Her mind ran through it fast, too fast to feel. Cyanide. Salazar's men at table 4 with their stiff suits and their forced stillness. The smell on the underside of the table on the right side, exactly where Kovac's hands rested. Not on the plate, not in the food, under the table. Contact transfer. She had heard of it, not from any official source. From Danny, actually, in the years before he got clean, when he would sometimes talk about the people he had worked for and the things they did, and she had listened because she loved him even when she didn't want to. She thought, this man is going to die. And then she thought, this man has killed people. And then she thought Danny is still alive because someone made a choice. The two thoughts arrived at the same time, and she let them sit there, side by side, while 4 seconds passed, and the room moved around her like nothing was wrong. Marco appeared at her elbow from nowhere. "You're stalled," he said, not unkindly. "Table 6 needs the second pour." "Sorry," she said automatically. She picked up the fresh bottle. She moved. Her feet carried her to table 6, and she poured and smiled and moved back toward the service corridor, and her mind was doing something she had no name for. Not panic exactly, and not calm, but something between them. Some state of total clarity that she had heard about in her mother's church but never experienced herself until this moment. She had maybe 2 minutes, maybe less. She didn't know how long the compound had been there, how long Kovac's hands had been in contact with it, how much had transferred to his skin. She didn't know if it was already too late. She didn't know if she was wrong. She thought about Marco's face when he'd briefed her. Stay calm, whatever you see. He knew something was off tonight. He didn't know this. She thought about the security men along the wall. She thought about walking up to one of them and saying the words out loud. She thought about how that would go. A waitress approaching a bodyguard claiming the Mafia boss is being poisoned. She thought about how many seconds that conversation would last before she was removed from the building. She thought about walking out, just walking out, untying her apron, going out the service exit, getting on the subway, going home. She had done nothing wrong. She had seen nothing, technically. She had smelled something. She could not be certain. She could walk away. She stood at the edge of the service corridor, and she looked at Adrian Kovac across the room, and she thought about Danny. She moved before she had finished thinking. There was no dramatic moment in her decision. No swelling of music, no sense of destiny settling around her shoulders. It was just her feet moving and her hands picking up the wine bottle and her body walking back toward the head table with the steady, unhurried professionalism of someone who had been doing this job for 6 years. Salazar was saying something about a meeting in the morning. His tone was the easy tone of a man with no concerns. His smile had the timing of a man who knew the conversation would not last much longer. Lena stepped up to the head table. She positioned herself at Kovac's right side, which was the natural approach for a pour, and she reached for his glass and she leaned forward just slightly more than was strictly necessary, close enough that she could keep her voice below the level of the table's general noise, and she said it. 2 words. No more. Check under. And then, because she could not leave it at that, because she needed him to understand without her having to say the rest, your table. She was already straightening up, already pulling back, already beginning the pour with hands that were not quite steady, and she did not look at him. She absolutely did not look at him. And she finished the pour and moved to the next glass and kept her face composed and empty and professional, the way she had trained it to be. She had taken 2 steps away when she heard the stillness. Not a silence, the room was still full of low voices and the clink of cutlery. But something at the head table went quiet in a way that was different from ordinary quiet. The particular quiet of a man who has just heard something that has rearranged his understanding of the last 10 minutes. She kept walking. Her heart was hammering so hard, she was certain the man at table 2 could hear it. She reached the service station and set down the bottle and gripped the edge of the counter and breathed. Behind her at the head table, she heard the soft sound of a chair shifting. A murmur. Then Kovac's voice, steady and unhurried, saying something she couldn't catch. The voice of a man who did not allow urgency to be visible. Then a different kind of movement through the room. Not sudden, not dramatic, just a reordering, like a clock that had been running one way beginning to run another. She heard a security man cross the floor behind her with a step that was a fraction quicker than normal. She heard someone at table 4 push their chair back. She did not turn around. She refilled the water pitcher and watched the wall and listened. The man from table 4 said something sharp in a language she didn't know. Then there was the sound of more chairs, more movement, and then Marco was beside her again, his voice tight and close to her ear. Go to the kitchen, he said. Right now. Don't ask questions. Go. Marco. Lena. His hand was on her elbow. Please. She went. The kitchen was louder than the dining room and smelled of garlic and heat, and the particular anxiety of a kitchen staff that sensed something was wrong beyond the double doors but had no information. 2 of the line cooks looked up when she came in. She went to the far counter and stood there with her back to the wall and her arms crossed and her mind running loops. She had done it. She had actually done it. She had warned Adrian Kovac that someone was trying to kill him. The absurdity of it would have been funny if her hands were not shaking. Through the porthole window set into the kitchen doors, she could see fragments of the dining room, small, round, moving frames of it, like watching the world through the wrong end of a telescope. She saw one of Kovac's security men walk past with a deliberateness that was different from his earlier movements. She saw the back of a man in a stiff suit, one of the table 4 men being guided somewhere with a hand that was polite but unyielding. She did not see Salazar. She did not see Kovac. One of the line cooks, a young guy named Paulo, who had been at the restaurant for less than a year and still hadn't learned to look unbothered when things went wrong, came up beside her and said in a low voice, "What's happening out there?" "Service," she said. "That's not service noise." "Paulo," she said with a patience she didn't entirely feel, "go back to your station." He went. She stayed at the counter and breathed and listened to the muffled sounds from beyond the kitchen doors and tried to arrange what she knew into something that made sense. She had smelled cyanide. That part she was certain of. The rest, what Kovac had done with the information, what Salazar had anticipated or not anticipated, what was happening right now in the dining room, she had no way of knowing from in here. What she did know was that she had made a choice that could not be unmade. The kitchen door swung open. She straightened up automatically, reaching for composure the way she might reach for a tray. It was not Marco. The man who came through the door was large, quiet, and wearing the kind of expression that communicated clearly that he was not here to discuss the menu. He was one of Kovac's men. She recognized him from his position along the wall, though she didn't know his name. He looked at her for a moment. Just looked. The way you look at something when you need to be absolutely certain you have the right thing before you do anything with it. You, he said. Mafia, she said. Come with me. It was not a question, but it was also, she noticed, not the kind of voice that expected her to argue. It was the voice of a man delivering a message rather than an order, which was a small distinction, but felt in that moment like it might matter. She set down the water pitcher. She untied her apron. She followed him back through the kitchen door. The dining room had changed, not visibly, not completely. The tables were still set. The lights were still at the same level. The remaining guests were still seated. But something structural had shifted the way a room feels different after furniture has been rearranged, even if you can't immediately identify what moved. 3 people who had been there before were gone. The table 4 men were not visible anywhere. 2 new faces had appeared near the entrance. And at the head table, Adrian Kovac was looking directly at her. She stopped walking. Not because she chose to, but because the full weight of that attention landed on her and her body made its own decision. He was not smiling. He was not angry. He was looking at her with the focused attention of a man who was accustomed to receiving information from unexpected sources and had learned to evaluate those sources quickly and accurately. Across from him, Salazar's chair was empty. Kovac said nothing for a moment. He picked up his wine glass with his right hand, the hand that had been resting on the table's edge, and held it without drinking. His eyes stayed on her. Then he said, "Come here." She came. She stopped at the appropriate distance from the table, the service distance muscle memory kicking in even now, and she stood with her hands still and her face as composed as she could make it, which she suspected was not very composed at all. "Sit down," he said. This is my shift, I'm still." "Sit down," he said again. Not louder, not harder, just the same, with the patience of a man who did not repeat himself as a rule, but was willing to do it once. She sat in the chair across from him. Salazar's chair. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "How did you know?" She thought about lying. She thought about deflecting, about pretending uncertainty. She looked at him, and she looked at the directness in his eyes, and she thought, this is not a man who responds well to evasion. "The smell," she said. "Under the table. I caught it when I was reaching for the glass. And you know what the smell means." It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. "My brother, he was poisoned 6 years ago. Different context, same compound." Something moved through his expression. Not softness exactly, but a recalibration of some kind. "He survived." "He survived," she said. Kovac set down the wine glass. He looked at her for another moment with that same focused attention, and then he looked down at his right hand, which was resting on the table now, and then he looked up again. "Your name," he said. "Lena," she said. "Lena Varelli." "Lena Varelli," he repeated as if he were writing it somewhere. "You've been working here 6 years." "Yes." "In 6 years," he said slowly, "I've eaten in this room 11 times. I have not once remembered the name of a person who served me." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. "I'll remember yours," he said. He looked away from her, then out toward the dining room, and whatever conversation they had been having was over. One of his men appeared at her elbow, a different one from before, older, with the permanent expression of a man who had not been surprised by anything since 1987. "We'll see you out," he said to her quietly but clearly. Lena stood up. She picked up nothing because she had nothing. She walked toward the exit through the thinned and rearranged dining room past the tables where the remaining guests were quietly and efficiently being informed that the evening had concluded. Past the bar where 2 men she didn't recognize were talking in low voices while a third watched the door. She pushed through into the cold air of the street. She stopped there on the sidewalk outside Pier's Edge restaurant, and she breathed. The city moved around her the way it always did, indifferent, constant, without interest in any individual story playing out in its borrowed light. Cabs went by. A couple argued on the corner. Someone's music floated out of a window 3 floors up. Lena Varelli stood in the cold and felt the weight of the last 40 minutes settle across her shoulders like a coat she had never asked to wear. She had done the right thing. She was almost certain she had done the right thing. What she was not certain of was what the right thing was going to cost her. That was not unusual for Lena. She had always been a light sleeper, the kind of person whose mind kept working long after her body had given up on the day. But this was different. This was not the ordinary restlessness of someone who drank too much coffee or carried too much stress from a double shift. This was the wide-awake, heart-loud alertness of someone whose life had quietly tilted on its axis and not yet found level ground. She lay on top of her covers in the dark of her apartment, and she stared at the ceiling and she went over it again. Every moment, every decision, the smell, the two words, the way Kovac had looked at her across the table in Salazar's empty chair with that focused and utterly unreadable attention. She went over it and looked for the place where she had made a mistake. She couldn't find one. That was almost worse than finding one, because a mistake would have been something to fix, something to point at and say, there, that's where I went wrong. I know what this is. The absence of a mistake meant she had made a real choice with real information and real consequences, and now she had to live inside those consequences without the comfort of having been foolish. She got up at 5 in the morning and made coffee she didn't taste, and sat at her kitchen table and called her brother. Danny picked up on the third ring, which meant he was already awake, which meant he was already at work at the bakery on 71st, where he had worked for the last 2 years. The sound of his voice, rough with flour in early hours, in the specific warmth of someone who did not yet know anything was wrong, made her close her eyes. Hey, he said, you okay? It's early. I know, she said. I wanted to hear your voice. A pause. She could hear him moving, stepping away from something loud. Lena, what happened? It wasn't a question. That was the thing about Danny. He had been through enough that he could hear the specific weight of a bad night inside a single sentence. Nothing happened, she said. I'm okay. You're calling me at 5 in the morning. You're awake. Because I work, not because I'm in trouble. Another pause. Was it a bad shift? She almost laughed. Something like that. You want to come over? I've got pastries. I'm fine, she said. I just needed to hear a human voice. I'm a human, he agreed. Mostly. He paused again, and this time the pause was different, softer, more careful. Whatever happened tonight, Len, you did what you had to do, right? She looked at her coffee cup. Yeah, she said quietly. I think so. Then that's all it is, he said. Go sleep. Come by later if you want. I'll save you a croissant. She told him she would and hung up and sat in the quiet of her kitchen and felt the specific loneliness of being the only person in a room who knew a thing that couldn't be shared. She did not go back to sleep. She showered, she dressed, she went to work. She almost called Marco first. She thought about it on the subway, holding the pole with both hands, watching her own reflection move in and out of focus in the dark window. She thought about what she would say. She thought about what he would say back. She thought about the look on his face the night before when he'd pulled her into the kitchen, the tight jaw, the careful eyes, the deliberate and specific avoidance of asking her what she had done. He had known something was happening. He hadn't asked. That told her something about what she was walking back into. The restaurant was quiet when she arrived for the lunch prep shift, that particular mid-morning hush of a place that transformed completely when evening came and had not yet begun its transformation. She went through the back entrance, hung up her jacket, and was tying her apron when Marco found her. He closed the hallway door behind him. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need you to tell me the truth. Okay, she said. Last night at the head table, what did you say to him? She met his eyes. I told him to check under his table. Marco was quiet for so long that she heard the ventilation system cycle through a full rotation before he spoke again. Lena. I know. Do you know who that man is? I know who he is. Then you understand the position you've... He stopped. He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose and stood there breathing for a moment. They found the device, he said finally, under the table, right where you... He stopped again. How did you know? She told him. Briefly, clinically, the way she had told Kovac, the smell, her brother, the contact transfer. She watched his face move through a series of expressions she didn't entirely have names for. When she finished, he said, you could have come to me. There wasn't time. You could have... He stopped. He knew she was right and didn't want to say so. What happens now, he asked, and it was almost plaintive, the question of a man who ran a restaurant and managed schedules and ordered linens and had somehow found himself far outside those coordinates. I don't know, she said honestly. Has he... Marco lowered his voice even though there was no one within 30 feet of them. Has anyone from his people reached out to you? Not yet, she said. The words settled between them with a weight that made Marco look at the ceiling. Not yet, he repeated. Not yet. Okay. He straightened up. He seemed to make some internal decision. She could see it in the shift of his shoulders, the way he squared himself. You're on the floor today. We're going to act normal. Everything normal. And if anyone comes in asking for you, I know how to handle it, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Yeah, he said quietly. I think you do. She went out to the floor. Lunch was busy enough to carry her through the first 2 hours without too much room to think. She moved through it on autopilot, taking orders, delivering plates, refilling drinks, managing the rhythm of the room with the efficiency she had spent 6 years building. The motions were so embedded in her body at this point that she could perform them completely while her mind went elsewhere, which was both a professional asset and today a mild form of self-protection. It was the hostess, a young woman named Carly, who had been at the restaurant less than a year, who leaned over to her between tables and said in a low voice, There's a man at the bar asking for you. Lena did not change her expression. What does he look like? Tall, older, very still, like he's not trying to be invisible, but he kind of is anyway. Kovacs man, the older one from the night before with the permanent expression. Tell him I'll be a moment, she said. She finished her current table with complete professionalism. She cleared a plate. She refilled a water glass. She smiled at a table of 4 women celebrating something and told them their desserts would be right out, and she meant it, and she went and put the order in, and only then did she walk to the bar. He was sitting on a stool with his jacket buttoned and his hands folded on the bar in front of him, as though he had been there an hour and expected to wait another hour if necessary. He looked at her when she approached without any particular urgency. Ms. Varelli, he said. That's me, she said. My employer would like to speak with you. This evening if possible. If not possible, whenever is convenient. The precision of that whenever is convenient was so careful that it told her more than the words themselves did. A man like Kovac did not send messengers who offered flexibility unless the flexibility was deliberate, unless it was being used to communicate something. What does he want to speak about? She asked. He didn't say. But you have a guess. The older man looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of respect and might have been nothing at all. I have a job, he said, which is to deliver the message. She looked at him. She thought about Danny's voice on the phone that morning. You did what you had to do, right? What time? She said. 9 o'clock. There's a car outside. She almost said I have a shift. She almost said I need more notice than this. She almost said a dozen things that would have been true and would have been completely beside the point. Give me 20 minutes, she said. I need to cover my tables. Marco, when she found him and explained in 4 words that she needed to leave, early went through 3 different expressions in approximately 2 seconds and then said, Go, I'll cover it, go. She went. The car was black and unremarkable, and the driver did not speak, which suited her fine because she had nothing to say to a driver. She sat in the back and watched the city move past the windows and thought about what she was walking into and found somewhat to her surprise that she was not afraid. Or rather, she was afraid, but the fear had a quality to it that was different from ordinary fear. It was the clean fear of someone who has already done the hard thing and is now simply moving toward the consequences. Not the fear of the unknown, the fear of the known arriving. They drove for 22 minutes. She counted. The building they stopped at was not what she expected. She had pictured something grander, something that announced its importance, but the building was quiet residential, the kind of address that communicated well through the complete absence of display. There were no visible security men outside. There was no indication from the street of who lived there or why it mattered. Inside was different. Not dramatically so, but the 2 men in the lobby, the way the elevator required a key, the brief exchange between her escort and someone she couldn't see through a cracked door on the 4th floor, these things had a practiced quality that told her the security here was not decorative. She was shown into a room that was, she noticed immediately, a working room, not a receiving room, not staged for impressiveness, a table with papers on it, a phone, 2 chairs that were functional rather than architectural, a man standing near the window with his back to her, not because he hadn't heard her enter, but because he was finishing a call. She stood and waited. Kovac ended the call and turned around and looked at her the way he had looked at her the night before, the same focused attention, but now without the context of the restaurant, without the ambient danger of the room. He looked different. More human was not quite right, but more specific, more real. "Ms. Varelli," he said. "Mr. Kovac," she said, which made something move at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He sat across from her on the other side of the table. He folded his hands in front of him in a way that was not aggressive but was deliberate, the gesture of a man who made a practice of keeping his hands visible so that the people across from him understood that he had nothing hidden in them. "I want to know what you want," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry. People who do what you did last night do it for one of three reasons," he said. "Fear, calculation, or something else. The first two require me to understand what you want. The third requires me to understand who you are." He looked at her steadily. "I've looked into you. You've worked at that restaurant for 6 years. Before that, 2 years at a diner in Queens. No record, no affiliations. One brother currently clean and employed. Your mother passed 4 years ago. Your father is not in the picture." He said this without particular weight, simply as information. "You are not connected to anyone I know, and no one I know has any claim on you. Which means last night was genuine." She said nothing. "Which means," he continued, "you took a risk that could have gotten you killed for a man you don't know based on a smell you recognize from something that happened to your brother 6 years ago. And then you stood in my dining room without flinching and told me exactly how you knew what you knew." "Yes," she said. "Why?" She had thought about this. On the subway that morning, in the shower, at the restaurant, in the back of the car. She had turned it over a dozen times looking for the answer that would satisfy both her and whoever asked. She had not found one that was complete, so she gave him the one that was true. "Because someone made a choice for my brother," she said. "A nurse in an emergency room who saw something and said something when saying nothing would have been easier. And he's alive because of it. That's the whole reason." Kovac was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The device under the table would have transferred enough compound to cause cardiac arrest within 3 to 4 hours. I would not have known what was happening until it was too late to reverse." She sat with that information. She had suspected it. Hearing it confirmed was a different thing. "Salazar had been planning this for 6 months, he continued, and his voice was even. But there was something beneath the evenness, not anger exactly, but its cold, compressed cousin. We found communications last night that made the timeline clear. The device was planted by one of the restaurant's own staff, someone I trusted." The shift of that sentence, "someone I trusted," landed quietly but hard. "Marco didn't know," she said immediately. "I know he didn't." For the first time, something shifted in his expression, not softness, but acknowledgement. "He's been cooperative. He'll keep his restaurant." A pause. "Not everyone in that building last night will keep what they have." She thought about the stiff-suited men at table 4. She thought about what cooperative meant in this context and decided she didn't want to ask. "What do you want from me?" she said. He looked at her. "I have a problem," he said. "Salazar is not finished. He failed last night, which means he'll move faster now because men like him don't accept failure. They accelerate around it. I have people who are very good at a number of things: protection, information, enforcement." He said the last word without apology. "What I have very few of is people who are good at being invisible." She felt something tighten in her chest. "I'm a waitress," she said. "You are someone," he said carefully, "who spent 6 years in a room full of the most dangerous men in this city and was noticed by exactly none of them until the moment you chose to be noticed. That is not a skill you can train. That is a way of being in the world." The sentence arrived and stayed there. "I'm not a criminal," she said. "I know. And I'm not looking to become one. I know that too." He leaned forward slightly, not threateningly, conversationally, the way a person leans in when they want to be heard. "I'm not asking you to be him. I'm asking you to use what you already are. Your eyes, your instincts, your ability to be in a room and understand it without drawing attention to yourself. In exchange," he paused, "in exchange, I ensure that your life does not become complicated in ways it doesn't deserve to be." She looked at him. "Are you protecting me or threatening me?" This time the corner of his mouth moved further, almost a smile, almost. "Both," he said, Honestly. She almost laughed. She didn't, but she almost did, and she thought that was probably the strangest response she had ever almost had to a sentence. What does it look like? She asked, in practical terms. He began to explain. She listened. She listened the way she had listened to everything in that restaurant for 6 years, not just to the words, but to the space between them. The things he said and the things he deliberately didn't. The places where his language was precise and the places where it went smooth in general. She listened for the lie in it, for the trap, for the place where what he was offering would turn out to cost more than the price he named. She didn't find one. That bothered her more than finding one would have. When he finished, she sat for a moment with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance, and she thought about the ceiling of her apartment at 5 in the morning. She thought about Danny's voice. She thought about the restaurant floor and 6 years of quiet and the specific comfort of knowing exactly where you stood in a world that stayed the same. Then she thought about the smell of bitter almonds and 2 words she had whispered into the air of a crowded room, and the way those 2 words had cracked open something that did not close again. She thought you can't unchoose a choice. She looked home at him. I need 2 things, she said. He waited. My brother stays out of it, whatever this is. He doesn't know, he doesn't get involved. Nothing that happens touches him. Agreed, he said without hesitation. And I stay at the restaurant, she said. I keep my job, my regular life. Whatever I do for you, I'm still Lena Varelli from Queens who waits tables at Pier's Edge. That doesn't change. He considered this for a moment longer than the first condition. Then he nodded. Also agreed. She breathed. One more thing, he said. She looked at him. Salazar knows you exist now, he said quietly. He may not know your name yet, but he knows someone in that room saved my life, and he will find out who. That is not a threat from me. It is a fact from him. I want you to understand the situation you are in. The words settled on her like cold water. She had known it. She had known it since last night, standing on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, with the city moving around her indifferent and constant. She had known it in the hollow of her chest and chosen not to look at it directly. Now she looked at it. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated. She stood up. He stood up. They looked at each other across the table of that working room, and she thought, this is the moment. This is the actual moment before everything after it. She had the sensation of standing at the edge of something vast and not being able to see the bottom. She extended her hand. He shook it. His grip was firm and brief and entirely matter-of-fact, the handshake of a man who was used to agreements being made in rooms exactly like this one. The same car will take you home, he said. She walked to the door. She had her hand on the frame when his voice came from behind her, quieter than it had been for the rest of the conversation and with a quality she hadn't heard from him yet. Your brother, he said. He's lucky. She turned her head slightly, but didn't turn all the way around. I know, she said. Not because of the hospital, he said. Because of you. She left. In the car on the way back, she sat in the quiet of the back seat and felt the city slide past and thought about what she had just agreed to. Not with terror, not with elation, with the sober, grounded weight of a person who has walked through a door that does not open from the other side. She had a job. She had a life. She had a brother who was alive and working in a bakery on 71st Street and saving her croissants. She also had now a name in a room she had never expected to be in, and a man who held the most dangerous real estate in the city looking at her as something other than furniture. She thought about Salazar's empty chair. She thought about the fact that she did not know yet what Salazar would do when he found out her name. She thought about the fact that Kovac had told her, and had told her plainly, and had not dressed it up or softened it, and that strangely against all logic was the thing that made her trust him most. The car moved through the city. Lena Varelli sat in the dark and thought about the life she was building on the far side of 2 whispered words, and outside the window, New York kept moving, indifferent and glittering, and completely unaware that something had changed. 3 days passed without anything happening, which was somehow worse than something happening. Lena went to work. She took orders. She cleared plates. She smiled at the right moments and stayed quiet at the right moments, and moved through the dining room of Pier's Edge with the same invisible efficiency that had defined 6 years of her working life. From the outside, nothing had changed. From the inside, everything had the slightly unreal quality of a room you've lived in for years that someone has subtly rearranged while you were sleeping. Same walls, same furniture, same light. but your body keeps reaching for things that aren't quite where they used to be. Marco watched her, not obtrusively, not with any expression she could name, but she felt his attention the way you feel weather before it arrives. On the second day, he refilled her coffee without being asked and set it down without a word and walked away, which was as close to "I'm sorry this happened to you" as Marco Luca was capable of getting. She appreciated it. On the fourth morning, she was unlocking her apartment door when she noticed the man across the street. He was not doing anything. That was the thing. He was simply standing there, hands in his jacket pockets, facing in the general direction of her building, with the relaxed posture of someone waiting for a bus. Except there was no bus stop where he was standing, and she had passed him on the way back from the subway, and he had been standing in approximately the same position then. She went inside. She did not go to the window. She made coffee and sat at her table and thought about it with the deliberate calm of someone choosing not to panic because panic was a luxury, and right now she could not afford it. Kovac had told her plainly, "Salazar knows someone saved my life. He will find out who." She had heard that sentence and thought she understood it. She understood it better now. She called the number she had been given. It rang twice. "I know," said the older man's voice, Renner. She had learned his name was Renner before she could say anything. "There's someone on your street. I noticed. He's been there since last night. He's not ours." The three words arrived in a very specific order, and she felt each one separately. "He's not ours." "Okay," she said. "Don't change your routine," Renner said. "Go to work. Take your normal route. Don't look at him when you leave." "Is he going to follow me?" "Yes." "And that's fine. We need to know who he reports to before we move. If he's Salazar's, that tells us something. If he's someone else's, that tells us something different." She thought about that. "I'm the bait," she said. A pause that was honest in its brevity. "You're the asset with the most exposure right now," Renner said. "We're using that strategically." "That's a more elegant way of saying the same thing." "Ms. Varelli," his voice was even, "you have 3 men within 2 blocks of you right now who are not interested in letting anything happen to you. The man across the street is being watched. You are not alone in this." She breathed. "Okay," she said again. She went to work. She took her normal route. She did not look at the man across the street when she left, and she did not look for the 3 men Renner had mentioned, and she got on the subway and held the pole and watched her reflection in the dark window and thought, this is what it is now. This is the shape of it. The restaurant was its usual mid-morning self when she arrived, and she was 20 minutes into prep when Carly found her at the side station and said with the careful voice of someone delivering information they don't entirely understand, "There's someone in the back asking for Marco. He says he's from the health department, but he's..." She paused. "He doesn't look like health department." "What does he look like?" Lena asked, keeping her voice level. "Young, nervous, and he keeps looking at the door like he's expecting someone to come through it." Lena set down what she was holding. "Tell Marco," she said. "Tell him right now." She stayed on the floor. She did her job, but her attention had split one half managing the room, one half tracking the back hallway through the porthole windows waiting. Marco appeared 11 minutes later. He found her at table 3 and stood close and spoke low and said, "The man in the back, he's one of ours, one of the restaurant staff. He's been feeding Salazar's people information about my booking schedule." The sentence detonated quietly. "For how long?" she asked. 8 months, Marco said. "In the wait of that 8 months, long before any of this, long before the private event, long before the device under the table sat between them like something physical." "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I already called Renner," he said, which told her something about how quickly Marco had reorganized his understanding of who he was now connected to. "He said to keep him here. Someone's coming." "Keep him calm," she said. "Tell him the health inspector is running late. Give him coffee." Marco looked at her with the expression of a man recalibrating. 6 years, he said quietly. 6 years, and I never once thought. "Don't," she said. "It doesn't help." He nodded. He went back to the kitchen. She kept working. 2 men arrived 40 minutes later through the service entrance. She didn't see them come in, and she didn't see them leave, and the young, nervous man who had claimed to be from the health department was not visible anywhere in the restaurant by the time the lunch rush began. What she did find tucked under the side station counter in an envelope with her first name on it was a folded piece of paper. She opened it in the break room. 3 words handwritten. Not Renner's hand, she didn't know whose. "You were right." She folded it again. She put it in her pocket, She went back to work and she thought about the word right and what it cost and what it was worth, and she didn't find a clean answer to either. That evening, instead of going straight home, the car took her to a different building. Not the one from before. This one was lower, wider, with the particular institutional quiet of somewhere that was used for work rather than living. Renner was there, and Kovac. Kovac was standing over a table covered in what looked to her civilian eyes like a substantial amount of organized information papers, photographs, a laptop open to something she couldn't see clearly. He looked up when she came in with the same focused attention that was becoming familiar to her. Now the look that said he was cataloging information rather than greeting a person. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "We've confirmed Salazar's next move," he said without preamble. He didn't ask if she was ready to hear it. He treated her, she had begun to notice, like someone who was ready for information simply because she was in the room. It was not a warm quality exactly, but it was a respectful one. "He's planning a meeting in 4 days. Private dining, different restaurant. He's bringing in someone from outside, a fixer, someone who specializes in making problems disappear cleanly." "What kind of problems?" she asked. Kovac looked at her steadily. "The kind that warn Mafia bosses about assassination attempts." The sentence arrived and she sat in it. "He knows my name," she said. It was not a question. "He knows the name of a woman who works at Pier's Edge," Kovac said. "He doesn't have the rest yet. He will within 48 hours, based on what the man from your restaurant told his people before this morning." Before this morning. Before the 2 men through the service entrance. She looked at her hands. "So what happens now?" "Now," Kovac said, "we don't wait for him to bring the fixer to us. We go to the meeting." She looked up. "We." "There are 8 restaurants in the city where Salazar's people conduct private business at that level," he said. "They rotate. We know 4 of them. The meeting in 4 days is almost certainly at one of 2 locations, and I need someone who can walk into both without drawing attention, assess which one is being prepared, and confirm the location." She understood it before he finished the sentence. "You need a waitress. I need someone who belongs in a room without anyone looking twice." He paused. "I have people who can fight. I have people who can surveil. I don't have people who can walk through a private dining room during active preparation and look like they're supposed to be there." "What am I looking for?" she asked. "Security placement that doesn't match the restaurant's usual staff, specific table arrangements, a back exit that's been left unlocked." She thought about it. She thought about every private event she had worked, the way preparation looked, the things that were different about a room when powerful people were coming versus regular guests. "I can do that," she said. Renner, standing near the wall, made a sound that was not quite a word. "She can do that," Kovac said to Renner, and his voice had the settled quality of someone who is not reopening a discussion. She looked at Kovac. If something goes wrong," he said, "you leave immediately, not in a moment, not after one more look. The second something is wrong, you walk out. There will be someone outside every exit. How will I know who they are?" "They'll know who you are," he said. "You don't need to know them." She sat with that. It was not a comfortable thought, and it was not meant to be. It was meant to be accurate. She was beginning to understand that this was how he operated, accurate over comfortable every time. "Okay," she said. Renner shifted. "Mr. Kovac, a word." Kovac looked at him. Then he looked back at Lena. "Give us a moment." She stood and stepped out into the hallway and stood there with her arms crossed and her mind running scenarios. From behind the closed door, she could hear the cadence of an argument without the words, Renner's voice lower and more deliberate. Kovac's responses shorter and more final. She heard her name once clearly, and then Kovac's voice saying something that ended the exchange. The door opened. Renner came out first. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has lost an argument he believed in and has made peace with it. "There's a briefing at 7 tomorrow morning," he said. "Don't be late." "I won't be," she said. She was not late. She arrived 6 minutes early to a room where Renner and 2 other people she hadn't seen before were already set up around a table. They spent 40 minutes going through the 2 possible restaurants with a detail and thoroughness that she found, despite herself, impressive. They talked about entry points and staff patterns and what legitimate preparation looked like versus something staged. They talked about what she should do if she was recognized and what she should do if the door was locked and what she should do if neither location checked out. She asked questions, good ones she could tell because the two people she didn't know exchanged a look at the third or fourth one that communicated something without words. After the briefing, when the others had packed up and left, Renner lingered. He poured himself a coffee from the machine in the corner and said without turning around, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" she asked. He turned around. His expression was as controlled as ever, but there was something different in it, something that cost him slightly more effort than usual to hold in place. "Someone who would need more time," he said, "to get used to this." "I grew up in Queens," she said, "with a brother who was addicted to things that people like Salazar provided. I've been getting used to how this world works since I was 14. He looked at her for a moment. "That's not a good reason to be in it," he said. "No," she agreed, "it's not, but it might be a good reason to know it." He nodded once. He drank his coffee. He left. She went to the first restaurant at noon. It was a Tuesday quiet in the way that upscale places are quiet on weekday afternoons. Not empty, but unhurried with the particular lull of somewhere that does most of its business after dark. She went in not as a waitress, but as a person looking for a job, which was a thin cover, but not a bad one. Someone walking through a restaurant during prep asking for a manager has a reason to look around without anyone thinking much of it. She had 5 minutes in the dining room while someone went to find the manager. She used all 5. The room was wrong in small ways. The tables along the east wall were arranged with more space between them than a restaurant that size normally would. One of the back hallway doors had a rubber wedge holding it open from the inside, a small thing easy to miss, but a door held open from inside during prep was a door that someone expected to use without fumbling with a handle. 2 of the men moving through the room were dressed as busboys but carried themselves with the particular postural awareness of people accustomed to being responsible for a room in a different way. She got the manager's name and left a fake callback number and thanked him for his time and walked out. She called Renner from the sidewalk. "First location," she said. "It's there." A pause, then, "Are you certain?" "3 indicators," she said and listed them. Another pause. "Get in the car." She got in the car. That night, she did not go to the building with papers on the table. Kovac came to her, which surprised her in a way that she absorbed without showing, because in 4 days she had gotten considerably better at absorbing surprises without showing them. He came to her apartment with Renner and one other man, and they sat in her kitchen at the table where she had drunk coffee she couldn't taste 4 mornings ago and gone over what she had seen. Kovac listened to everything she said without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was thinking rather than the way that meant he was doubting. "The wedge door," he said. "Which hallway?" "East side, closer to the kitchen than the exit." "Service corridor," he said almost to himself. Then to Renner, "They're planning to bring him in through the kitchen." Renner nodded slowly. "Not the front." "Which means they're not planning a clean meeting," Kovac said, and his voice had gone very level in a way that made the room temperature feel different. "They're planning an event." She looked at him. "What kind of event?" He looked at her, and this time the focus in his eyes had an edge to it that she hadn't seen before, not directed at her, but present, undisguisable. "The kind where not everyone leaves," he said. She absorbed that. "The fixer isn't coming for me," she said slowly. "No," Kovac said. "He's the distraction. The real target." He stopped. "You," she said. "They're going to make it look like I walked into a meeting and things went badly." He said, "A territory dispute, something that can be explained without anyone looking too hard." "But you know where it is now," she said. "You know when." "Yes," he said. "So you can be ready." "Yes." She looked at him across her kitchen table. "Then you don't need me anymore tonight," she said. "You know what you need." He looked at her. That same attention, that same focused, cataloging steadiness. And then something shifted in it, barely just slightly, the way a door moves when someone on the other side puts their hand on the handle without yet turning it. "No," he said, "not tonight." He stood. Renner stood. The other man stood. At her door, Kovac paused. He did not turn around completely, just slightly the same way she had at the door of his working room 4 nights ago. "Lock the secondary bolt," he said. "I always do," she said. "I know," he said. "But tonight also lock the window latch on the east side." She felt something move through her chest, not fear, something more precise than fear. The specific feeling of understanding in an instant that someone has been paying more attention to your safety than you were aware of. "How long have you had someone watching my apartment?" she asked quietly. "Since the night you walked out of the restaurant," he said. She stood in her doorway after they left and thought about that. Since the night you walked out, before the car had come, before she had agreed to anything, before he had known whether she could be trusted or used, or whether she was anything at all beyond a waitress who had whispered 2 words into the air. He had put someone on her building before any of that. She locked the secondary bolt. She locked the east window latch. She stood in her kitchen and she thought about 4 days ago and how entirely different the shape of her life looked from where she was standing now. And she thought that the strangest part was not that it had changed so fast. The strangest part was that some piece of her, some deep unasked part she hadn't known was waiting, felt less invisible than it had in years. Her phone lit up on the counter, a text from Danny. "Got extra croissants today, you still coming by?" She picked up the phone. She typed back, "Tomorrow, save me 2." She put the phone down. She turned off the kitchen light. And in the dark, she thought about a man in a room across the city who was planning to walk into a trap he now knew the exact shape of, and she thought about what it meant that she had been the one to give him that shape. And she thought about what tomorrow would bring, and she thought about Salazar's fixer, and the wedged door, and the east corridor, and all the things that were now in motion that had begun impossibly with a smell she recognized from the worst night of her life. She thought you can't unchoose a choice, and this time when the thought arrived, it did not feel like a warning. She had thought about calling Renner to confirm the logistics one more time. She had thought about calling Danny just to hear his voice the same way she had called him the morning after the restaurant, when the weight of what she'd done had settled on her like weather. She thought about both of those calls and made neither of them because calling people when you were afraid had a way of making the fear feel larger, and right now she needed it to stay exactly the size it was manageable, contain something she could carry without it carrying her. She slept 4 hours. Clean, dreamless sleep, the kind that comes not from peace, but from exhaustion, so complete that the body simply stops negotiating and goes under. She was up before 5. Coffee, shower, the same ritual that had started every difficult day for as long as she could remember. Renner called at 6:47. "Change of plan," he said, and those 3 words did something to the temperature of the room. "What kind of change?" she said. "Kovac is moving the operation to tonight instead of tomorrow. Salazar's people made contact with the restaurant this morning to confirm. They're accelerating. Why? Because someone told them we were on to the location." She went very still. "Someone told them." "Yes." "Someone inside." "Yes." His voice was controlled in a way that took effort. She could hear the effort. "It wasn't Marco. I want to be clear about that. But someone with access to last night's conversation? The third man," she said. "The one she hadn't known in her kitchen. The one who had stood near the wall and said nothing the entire time. A pause that confirmed it without saying so." "Where is he now?" she asked. "Being dealt with," Renner said, and the particular flatness of that phrase told her not to ask what being dealt with meant in this context. "Okay," she said. "So tonight, 8 o'clock, we need you at the staging point by 6. "I'll be there by 5:30, she said. Another pause, shorter, different in quality. "Miss Varelli, you understand this is more complicated now. Salazar's people know we identified the location. They may have adjusted their setup, which means the indicators I found might not hold." "Correct. Which means someone needs to go back in." Silence. "Renner," she said, "that is an option that is being discussed," he said carefully. "It's the only option that makes sense," she said. "I was there yesterday. I have a reason to go back. I told them I'd call about the job. I can follow up in person." "The risk level, Sibo, is higher than yesterday," she finished. "I know. I'm still the right person." She heard him breathe. Not a sigh. Renner didn't sigh. She had gathered that much about him in a short time. But a breath that carried the weight of a decision being made against competing pressures. "I'll tell Kovac," he said. "Tell him I'm already on my way," she said, and hung up before he could respond. She got to the staging point at 5:22. Kovac was already there. This surprised her slightly less than it would have 4 days ago. He was standing over the same kind of table covered in information setup she was beginning to associate with him specifically, and he looked up when she came in with an expression that was not quite concern, but was adjacent to it in a way she was learning to read. Renner told me what you want to do, he said. It's not what I want, she said. It's what makes sense. Walk me through it, he said. She walked him through it. The callback story. The timing she would go in at 3 in the afternoon during the slowest part of the prep window when staff attention was divided between setup and the kitchen. She would be in the dining room for no more than 8 minutes. She knew what she was looking for now, not just indicators of a prepared space, but indicators of a changed space adjustments made after their location was burned. Kovac listened the way he always listened, completely without interrupting, without the small reassuring sounds people make when they want you to know they're following. He simply received the information and held it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. There's a man named Carver, he said. He'll be outside the east exit, 6 feet gray jacket. If anything goes sideways inside, I know I leave immediately. No, he said. If anything goes sideways, you say the word difficult to whoever is nearest to you and walk toward the east exit. That's all. You don't run. You don't look for Carver. You just move toward that door and he will handle the rest. She looked at him. Difficult. Difficult, he repeated. The words sat between them with a weight that was almost absurd, given how ordinary it was, and she thought this is what it looks like from the inside. Code words in a staging room at 5 in the morning. A man whose name she didn't know 4 days ago telling her what to say if something tries to kill her. Okay, she said. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. If you feel wrong about it when you get there, he said, turn around. I'm serious. If your instincts say no, you trust your instincts and you walk away. We'll find another way. You don't have another way, she said. That's why I'm here. I know, he said. I'm asking you to trust your instincts anyway. She almost said something and didn't. What she almost said was, that's the first time anyone's ever said that to me and meant it. She didn't say it because it was too true to be useful right now. I'll trust my instincts, she said. She left at 2:15. The restaurant was 21 blocks away, and she walked the first 12 of them, which was not efficient, but gave her time to settle into the version of herself she needed to be when she walked through the door. Not Lena, who had sat in Kovac's working room and shaken his hand. Not Lena, who had locked the east window latch and lain awake thinking about shapes of lives. Just Lena, who had come in yesterday looking for work and was following up the way a person genuinely looking for work would follow up. She had done more difficult things with less preparation. She had sat across from her brother in a hospital waiting room at 18 and held it together for 6 hours because there was no one else to hold it together. She had told her mother the truth about Danny's addiction when her mother had spent 2 years refusing to see it, and she had done that with a steady voice and a steady face because the truth needed to be said cleanly or it wouldn't land. She could walk into a restaurant. She went in at 3:04. The man at the front, not the manager from yesterday, someone different, younger, with the slightly too attentive quality of someone whose job was not actually front of house, looked at her and said, "Can I help you?" "I came in yesterday about the server position," she said. "I spoke with Thomas. He said to follow up today." A beat. The young man's eyes moved in a way she logged but didn't react to a quick, sideways check, the kind people make when they want to confirm something with someone else in the room without making it obvious. "I'll let him know you're here," he said. "Just a moment." She smiled. She stood. She let her eyes move through the room with the relaxed curiosity of someone with nothing to hide and all the time in the world. The room had changed. Not dramatically. Not in ways that a regular person walking in off the street would notice. But to her eyes that had cataloged 1,000 private events, 1,000 small wrongnesses. 6 years of reading rooms, the changes were loud. The east corridor door was closed now. Yesterday it had been wedged open. That meant either they had realized the wedge was a tell, or they had changed the entry plan entirely. The table arrangement along the east wall was the same, but one of the chairs had been shifted, just one at the table closest to the back, so that whoever sat there would have a direct sightline to the main entrance. That was not a dining configuration. That was a watching configuration. And then there was the man near the bar. He was not a busboy. He was not staff of any kind, and she knew it within 3 seconds of looking at him, because staff moved with purpose, And this man was perfectly, carefully, deliberately still, which was its own kind of purpose, but a different kind. He was watching the room the way she had been trained over 4 days to recognize, not casually, not with the wandering attention of someone passing time, but with the patient focus of someone waiting for a specific thing to happen. He had not been there yesterday. She needed to leave. She needed to leave right now, and she needed to do it in a way that took 45 seconds rather than 4, because 4 seconds would register and 45 would not. Thomas appeared from the back hallway, and she gave him the same warm, job-seeking smile she had given him yesterday and said, "I'm so sorry to follow up in person. I just didn't hear back, and I wanted to make sure my number went through correctly." Thomas was relaxed. Thomas, she was nearly certain, had no idea what was being prepared in his restaurant tonight. Thomas had been told it was a private booking. His and their kind came through twice a year. He handled them the way he handled all private bookings, with professional discretion and a deliberate lack of curiosity. "I'm sorry about that," he said, with the genuine apology of a man who managed a restaurant and understood the annoyance of not being called back. "Let me get your number again." She gave him a number. She let him write it down. She thanked him. She turned toward the door at the pace of someone who has accomplished a small errand and is moving on to the next one. She was 8 feet from the exit when the man near the bar spoke. Not to her, to someone she couldn't see in the back, in a voice low enough that she should not have been able to catch the words. She caught 2 of them. Her name. She kept walking. She did not change her pace by a single fraction. She pushed through the front door with the same energy she had entered it with and stepped onto the sidewalk and turned left, which was not the direction of the east exit, which was wrong, which was the first crack in her composure. She stopped herself. She thought east exit. She turned. She walked around the corner of the building at the same pace she had been walking, not fast, not slow, the pace of someone who has been somewhere and is going somewhere else. And the east exit was 15 feet ahead, and the man leaning against the wall next to it in a gray jacket was either Carver, or her day was about to get significantly worse. He looked at her when she came around the corner. He was already moving. He fell into step beside her without a word, which was either professionalism or threat, and she was in the process of deciding which when he said quietly, "Car's at the end of the block. Don't stop." She didn't stop. They reached the car. She got in. He got in the other side. The car was already moving before the door was fully closed, and Carver, she had decided he was. Carver had his phone to his ear, already speaking in a clipped and abbreviated way that she didn't try to parse. Her hands, she noticed, were shaking. Not badly, just slightly, the small, seismic activity of adrenaline finding its way out. She pressed them flat against her thighs and breathed. "They knew my name," she said. Carver lowered his phone. "Say again." "The man at the bar, he said my name to someone in the back. He'd been told to watch for me." Carver's expression did something controlled and went back to controlled. He put the phone back to his ear and said 3 words into it she didn't catch, and then he looked at her and said, "How certain are you?" "Completely," she said. He said 2 more words into the phone. Then he lowered it and looked at her and said, "We need to get you somewhere secure until tonight." "What about the room?" she said. "Did they change the setup?" "Ms. Varelli?" "Carver." She said his name with a firmness that surprised even her. "What I saw in that room matters. Did they change the setup or not? Because if they close the east corridor and move the watch position, Kovac needs to know before 8 o'clock. Carver looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Tell me exactly what you saw." She told him. He was on the phone before she finished the second sentence. The secure location turned out to be a nondescript apartment 3 neighborhoods over that smelled like coffee and had the particular organized blankness of a place that was used for work and nothing else. Renner was there within 20 minutes. Kovac within 40. When Kovac walked in and looked at her, she saw for the first and only time in the days she had known him, something that was not controlled. It was brief, it was immediately recaptured, but it was there, the specific expression of a man who has just been told someone he sent somewhere dangerous, narrowly avoided something, and is processing the fact that he sent them there. "You're all right," he said. It was not quite a question. "I'm fine," she said, "and I know what they changed." He sat down. He looked at her. "Tell me." She told him. All of it, the closed door, the shifted chair, the man at the bar, the 2 words she had heard. She told him the way she told him everything now, with the clean, factual economy of someone who understood that clarity was more useful than drama. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he sat for a moment in silence, and the quality of the silence was different from his usual thinking silence. It had a harder edge to it. They moved the watch position to the front, he said slowly, which means they changed the entry point. They're not coming through the east corridor anymore. They burned that when they found out we knew, Renner said. So where are they coming from, Kovac said, and it was directed at the room, generally not at anyone specifically, the voice of a man thinking out loud. The bar, she said. Both of them looked at her. The man at the bar, she said. He wasn't watching the room for my benefit, that was secondary. He was in position. The bar backs up to the kitchen on the west side of the building. If you come through the kitchen and into the bar, you're already in the room before anyone at the entrance sees you. The silence that followed was different from the last one. Renner turned and picked up his phone without being told to. Kovac looked at her with that focused attention and said in a voice that had gone very quiet, "How do you know the bar backs up to the kitchen?" "I looked at the floor plan when I was waiting for Thomas," she said. "It was on the permit filing in the frame by the host stand. Restaurants are required to post it." Another silence. "You saw all of that," he said, while maintaining a cover conversation and monitoring the man at the bar. "I had 8 minutes," she said. "I used them." He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said something she had not expected from him, something that landed differently from anything else he'd said to her. "I underestimated you," he said, "when Renner first told me about you. I thought you were brave. I didn't understand yet that brave was the least of it." She looked at him. She felt something move through her chest that she didn't immediately have a name for. Not pride exactly, something older than that. The feeling of being seen accurately by someone whose accuracy you had learned over 4 days of compressed and improbable experience to respect. "Don't underestimate me again," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "No," he agreed, "I won't, Jay." The operation reshuffled in the next 2 hours with the focused intensity of people who were very good at adjusting to new information under pressure. She watched it happen around her, Renner on the phone carver over maps, Kovac moving through it all with the same hurried authority she had first noticed across the dining room of Pier's Edge a week ago that felt like a year ago. She was not peripheral to it. They brought things to her. They asked her questions. They treated the information she had gathered as load-bearing. At 6:30, Kovac came and sat across from her in the corner of the apartment where she had positioned herself out of the traffic flow. "There's something you need to know before tonight," he said. She waited. Salazar's fixer, the man he brought in. He paused in a way that was not habitual for him. His name is Dre. He's been active for 11 years. In that time, he's been connected to 14 disappearances. People who got too close to things Salazar needed kept quiet. She kept her face still. "He has your name, Lena," Kovac said, and the use of her first name the first time in all of it that he had used just her first name made the sentence land harder than it would have otherwise. "He had it before you went into that restaurant today. The man at the bar was confirmation, not discovery. They confirmed your face," she breathed. "He's going to be in that building tonight," Kovac said, "and one of his objectives alongside whatever Salazar has planned for me is you." The room did not change. She was aware of the people moving through it, the low voices, the organized urgency of the operation adjusting itself. She was aware of Kovac across from her, watching her with that attention that never quite left. "You told me this so I'd stay here tonight," she said. "I told you this so you could make a real choice," he said. "Not a brave one, a real one." She looked at him. She thought about 14 disappearances. She thought about a man named Dre who had her name and her face and was going to be in a building tonight with a specific objective that included her. She thought about what it meant that Kovac was sitting here telling her this instead of simply arranging for her to be somewhere safe without her consent. He could have done that. She understood by now enough about how he operated to know that it would have been easy. He had told her instead, because he had said he would treat her choices as real ones, and he was keeping that. "I'm not staying here," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not going into the building," she said, "but I'm not sitting in this apartment while you walk into a trap that I helped map and I helped adjust, and I have the clearest picture of anyone in this room. Put me where I'm useful, outside, information position, whatever that looks like." He was quiet for a moment. "There's a position across from the west entrance," he said slowly. Someone needs to confirm when Dre arrives. He'll come in through the bar side. They need to know the moment he's inside so the timing can be set. What does Dre look like? She said. Kovac reached into the papers on the table beside him and slid a photograph across to her. She looked at it. She committed it. She slid it back. Put me across from the west entrance, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of long moment that she was learning meant he was not deciding he had decided, but was allowing himself to feel the weight of the decision before he moved forward with it. Carver stays with you, he said, the whole time. He doesn't leave your position for any reason. Fine, she said. If Dre makes you, if there is any indication he sees you. Difficult, she said. His jaw tightened slightly. Lena. I know, she said. Carver. East. I don't stop. He held her gaze for another second. Then he nodded. She sat across from the west entrance of that restaurant at 7:51, and she watched the door with Carver beside her, and the city moving around them like it always did, indifferent, constant, without interest in the particular story playing out in its borrowed dark. Her phone was in her hand and Renner's number was open and her thumb was positioned. At 8:03, a man came around the corner of the building from the south, walking with the unhurried pace of someone who was never in a hurry because urgency was for people who weren't certain of outcomes. She looked at his face. She looked at the photograph she had committed to memory 40 minutes ago in that apartment. She pressed call. Renner picked up in one ring. He's inside, she said. A pause. 1 second. 2. Then Renner's voice stripped of everything except information. Copy that. Hold your position. She held her position. Carver's hand came to rest very lightly on her arm, not restraining, just present. She understood it. She was glad of it. Inside that building, something was beginning that she had started with 2 words whispered into the air of a crowded restaurant 7 days ago. And she sat outside in the dark and breathed and thought about Danny saving her a croissant, and thought about the east window latch, and thought about the shape of things that could not be unchosen. Then the sound came from inside. Not a gunshot, not anything cinematic, just a sudden, dense, decisive silence, the kind that happens when a large thing changes all at once, followed by voices, multiple voices controlled, but raised the specific register of people imposing order on a situation that had just been taken apart and reassembled in a different configuration. Then nothing. Then Renner's voice in her ear, very level, saying 3 words, "It's done, come in." Renner's voice said "it's done," and the words arrived clearly, and she heard them and understood them, and still she sat for 3 full seconds without moving, because 3 seconds was what her body needed to confirm that the danger had a past tense now, and not just a present one. Carver was already standing. His hand on her arm shifted from present to guiding a small but distinct change in pressure, and she stood and they crossed the street together toward the west entrance of the restaurant, and she pushed through the door into a room that smelled like tension and resolved itself into something else entirely. The room was full of Kovac's people. Not dramatically, not the way movies stage these things with men holding weapons at theatrical angles and bodies on the floor, and chaos that announced itself. It was quieter than that and more complete. The controlled, methodical aftermath of a situation that had been handled by people who had handled situations before and did not need to perform the handling for anyone watching. Dre was seated at one of the tables with his hands on the surface in front of him, and 2 of Kovac's men positioned at angles that made standing up an obviously poor decision. He was not what she had expected from the photograph, or rather, he was exactly what the photograph showed. But photographs didn't convey the specific quality of stillness that some dangerous men had, the stillness of someone who was calculating rather than afraid, running numbers behind their eyes, while their face stayed flat and their hands stayed visible. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back at her. He knew who she was. She could see it, not hostility, not fear, just recognition. The precise recognition of a man who had been given a description and was now confirming it against the real thing. She looked away first, not because she was afraid, because she had already given him all the attention he was worth to her, which was confirmation and nothing else. Kovac was across the room. He was standing with Renner near the bar, the same bar she had identified 6 hours ago as the changed entry point, and he was speaking in a low and even voice to 2 men she didn't know. He looked up when she came in, and the thing that happened in his expression was brief and controlled, and she caught it anyway because she had spent a week learning to read the small things he allowed to be visible. He crossed to her directly. No pause, no detour. "You're all right," he said. You said that already, she said. Last time I walked out of something. Last time I wasn't certain it was true until I saw you, he said. She looked at him. The room moved around them, Renner directing someone, Carver reporting, and the two men she didn't know handling Dre with the professional efficiency of people whose job this was. And in the middle of all of it, Kovac stood in front of her with that focused attention and said something that was completely uncharacteristic of everything she had observed about how he communicated with the world. He said it plainly, no angle, no strategy. She didn't know what to do with it immediately, so she said, "What happened in here?" He accepted the redirect without comment. Dre came through the bar entry, as you said. Two of Salazar's men were already positioned at the east corridor, covering the original entry point, which they assumed we'd use. We didn't. He paused. We came in from above. She processed that. The upper floor. There's a private dining room on the second level, booked under a different name 3 weeks ago. He said it with a flatness that contained, she understood, a significant amount of preparation. Salazar's people weren't watching up. They were watching east and west. They didn't think about above. "Where is Salazar?" she asked. The question landed in a specific way. She watched Kovac's face and saw the answer before he gave it. "Salazar wasn't here tonight," he said. She went still. "What?" "He sent Dre and his crew. He did not come himself." Kovac's voice was even, but there was something beneath it that had a cold, compressed quality she recognized from the moment 3 days ago when he'd said someone I trusted. He knew we had identified the location. "The man in my kitchen," she said, "the one who warned them. He told Salazar enough to make Salazar cautious enough to stay away and send proxies." His jaw moved. "Salazar has not been cautious for 11 years. Whatever the man told him, whatever combination of things we did this week, it was enough to make him careful for the first time." She thought about what that meant. She turned it over carefully. "So, tonight wasn't a trap that you walked into," she said slowly. "Tonight was a trap that he set to confirm whether you knew what he knew." Kovac looked at her. "He needed to know if we had someone who could find him," she said. "So he sent Dre and his people, and he watched to see how you responded. If you didn't show, you didn't know. If you showed and were unprepared, he had the advantage. But if you showed prepared," she paused, "he knows he has a real problem." The silence that followed had a different quality from every silence she had sat through with him this week. "How long have you been thinking about that?" he asked. "Since Carver told me to hold my position," she said. Something felt off about Dre coming in from the street. A fixer of his level walking openly to a front entry, no real concealment. It was too visible. I kept thinking, a man who has been doing this for 11 years doesn't walk into a room like he owns it unless he knows he's not the main event. Kovac turned and looked at Renner across the room. Renner, who had apparently been listening from a distance that should not have allowed him to hear, but clearly had met his eyes and gave a single slow nod. "She's right," Renner said, not grudgingly, with the clean acknowledgement of someone who had recalibrated. Kovac turned back to her. "If Salazar knows we have someone who can read a room, he'll want to know who it is," she said. "And he already does. He's known my name since before I walked into that restaurant today." "Yes." "So he watched tonight to confirm that Lena Varelli from Pier's Edge isn't just someone who got lucky with a smell," she said. "He wanted to know if I was real." "And now he knows," Kovac said quietly. The sentence arrived, and she let it land. She did not look away from him. "So this isn't over." "No," he said. "This is the beginning of the part that requires the most care." She breathed. "Okay." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Come with me." They went to the back of the restaurant, away from the organized activity of the main room, into a smaller space that was quiet in contrast. Renner followed. Carver stayed at the door without being asked. Kovac sat down. She sat across from him. Renner stood near the wall, which seemed to be his natural position in most rooms. "I need to make a decision about Salazar," Kovac said. "And I need to make it tonight because the window for making it on our terms is closing." He said this with the directness he had used with her from the beginning, not softening it, not performing it, just saying what was true. "If I move on him before he has time to adjust to what he learned tonight, I have the advantage. If I wait, he adjusts and the next move becomes significantly more complicated." She waited. "Moving on him means a level of action that will reorganize things," he said. "The city will feel it. Not publicly, but in the places where things are felt. You're telling me this because it connects to me, Richard. Because when it happens, the people around Salazar who know your name will no longer be in a position to act on it, he said, which means your exposure drops significantly. He paused. But before that happens, there is a gap, a window between tonight and when I move. During that window, Salazar knows what you are to me, and he will try to use it. The specific phrasing, what you are to me, she noticed it. She didn't address it directly. How long is the window, she asked. 48 hours, he said. 72 at the most. And during that window, you don't go home, he said. You're not at the restaurant. You're not anywhere that Salazar's people have a prior location for. Danny, she said immediately. Already handled, Renner said from the wall. As of an hour ago, your brother is visiting a friend in Philadelphia. He thinks you arranged it because of a problem with your apartment. He doesn't know anything else. She looked at Renner. She felt a rush of something that was relief and something else mixed together, that something else being the particular discomfort of realizing that people had been moving pieces of your life without your knowledge, even in service of protecting you. You should have told me, she said. There wasn't time to ask, Renner said. Not defensive, just factual. She turned it over. She thought about arguing it and decided that the argument, while valid, was less important right now than Danny being in Philadelphia. Okay, she said. Where do I go? Kovac named a location. She didn't know it. He told her it was secure in a way she would understand by now. Meant multiple layers and no loose ends, and she did understand it, and she nodded. One more thing, he said. She looked at him. Dre, he said. He's going to be questioned tonight about Salazar's current location, his next move, his contingencies. He said it without an inflection. Before we do that, is there anything you want to ask him? The question surprised her. She sat with it for a moment. Why would I want to ask him anything? Because he was sent for you specifically, Kovac said. And because you have a right to look a man in the face who was paid to make you disappear and ask him whatever you need to ask him. It was the most unexpected thing he had said to her in a week of unexpected things. She thought about it. She actually thought about it not as a reflex, but as a real consideration. What would she ask? What was there to know? She thought about 14 disappearances. She thought about the specific coldness of a man who did this as a profession, who had sat at that table with his hands flat and his face neutral and run calculations. No, she said finally, I don't need to ask him anything. Kovac looked at her. I know what he is, she said. Knowing why doesn't change it. And I don't want to give him the chance to think he matters to me more than he does. Something moved through Kovac's expression. It's settled. Good, he said quietly. She spent that night and the following night in the secure location, which turned out to be a small apartment on the upper floor of a building in a neighborhood she knew slightly kept company by Carver and by Renner for portions of both days and by her own thoughts for the rest of it. She called Danny on the second afternoon. He was cheerful in Philadelphia, eating cheesesteaks and complaining about his friend's coffee maker, blissfully unaware that his presence in that city was not coincidental. She listened to his voice and thought about the bakery on 71st Street and the croissants he saved for her and the specific texture of a life that stayed the same from one day to the next. And she thought about whether that life still existed for her on the other side of this week. She thought it did. She thought it had to. On the second evening, Renner came and sat across from her in the kitchen of the safe apartment and said without preamble, "It's done." She looked at him. Salazar, he said, is of this afternoon. She did not ask what done meant. She had learned in 1 week not to ask certain questions that had answers she was not required to carry. And Dre, she asked? No longer a concern, he said. She nodded. She looked at the table. She thought about 14 disappearances and about the 2 words she had whispered into a crowded room 8 days ago, and about everything that had unspooled from those 2 words. And she thought, this is what a chain of consequences looks like when you're inside it instead of watching it from the outside. What happens now, she asked. That Renner said is a conversation for tomorrow with Kovac. She met Kovac the next morning in the working room she had first seen him in, the one with the table and papers and 2 functional chairs, the room that communicated work rather than theater. He was already there when she arrived. He looked like a man who had not slept particularly well and had made peace with that fact. She sat down. He sat across from her. He said, "How are you?" It was the first time he had asked her that. Not how are you in the transactional sense, the opener before the information. Actually asked, she thought about it seriously. Strange, she said, in a way that I think will take a while to sort out. Yes, he said, like he knew the feeling, like it wasn't a figure of speech. Is it over? She asked. Salazar's network, the people who knew my name. The people who knew your name and had the authority to act on it, he said carefully, are no longer in a position to do so. There are people who may still have the information, but information without structure behind it is just a word. He paused. You're safer today than you were 8 days ago. I can tell you that with confidence. That's a careful way to say yes, she said. It's an accurate way to say mostly, he said. She almost smiled. I'll take mostly. He folded his hands on the table. She had come to know that gesture, the visible hands, the deliberate positioning. I want to talk about what comes next, he said. Okay, she said. What you did this week, he said. I don't have a framework for it. I want to be direct about that. The people who work for me have roles. Defined capabilities, defined limits, defined relationships with what they do and why they do it. He paused. You don't fit any of those frameworks. What you did was not the product of training or assignment. It was the product of who you are. And I don't know what to do with that except to be honest about it. She looked at him. What does honest look like? Honest looks like this, he said. I want you involved, not as staff, not as an asset in the way Renner uses the word, which is transactional, as someone whose judgment I trust and whose presence changes the quality of what I'm able to understand about a situation. He said it steadily without inflection, designed to persuade. Just the statement. In return, I want to give you something real, not protection as a transaction, something that actually improves your life in ways that matter to you. She looked at him for a long time. What about my life the way it is, she said. The restaurant, the regular Tuesday and the regular Friday, and the apartment with the east window, and the brother who saves me pastries. It stays, he said, all of it. I told you that at the beginning. You also told me at the beginning that Salazar would find my name, she said. And he did. Things you said would stay complicated faster than you expected. Yes, he said, no deflection. So why should I believe the rest of it holds? He was quiet for a moment. Because what complicated things was not me, he said. It was the man in your kitchen who betrayed us both, who has been dealt with. He leaned forward slightly. I can't promise you the world won't produce more complications. I can promise you that I don't lie to people I've made commitments to, and that when I say something stays, it stays unless something outside my control changes it. And if that happens, you will hear it from me directly and immediately. She sat with that. She thought about every interaction she had had with him across 8 days. She thought about the moments he could have handled things without telling her and didn't. She thought about him sitting across from her in her own kitchen, telling her that Dre had her name and her face when he could simply have had Carver take her somewhere, and she would have been none the wiser. He had told her every time, even when it was worse. My brother's number gets scrubbed from whatever that informant told Salazar's people, she said. Already done, he said. I'm not available every day, she said. I have shifts. I have a life that has its own schedule, and that schedule takes priority. Understood, he said. And if there's ever a moment where what you're asking me to do requires me to hurt someone, not protect myself, not read a room, but actively harm a person, we have a different conversation. He looked at her. I will never put you in that position, he said. That is not what you are to this. The phrase again. What you are. She let it settle this time rather than moving past it. What am I to this, she asked. He considered it. Not the quick consideration of someone searching for a diplomatic answer. The genuine consideration of a man who took words seriously and was going to give her the accurate one. The thing I didn't know I was missing, he said. Someone who is in a room and understands it. Not from training, not from calculation. Because they have spent their life learning to pay attention out of necessity, and that kind of attention is different from every other kind. She looked at him across the working table in the room that was not staged for impressiveness, in a building that did not announce what it was, in a city that had continued its indifferent and constant motion through every extraordinary thing that had happened in the last 8 days. She thought about her mother who had taught her to watch. She thought about Danny who had taught her what it cost to look away. She thought about 6 years of moving through rooms full of dangerous men who saw furniture and the specific discipline of being invisible by choice, not by deficit. She thought about 2 words whispered into the air of a crowded restaurant on a night that now felt like the border between 2 versions of her life. She had not been brave, or rather, brave was the least of it. Renner had said so, and he had been right. She had been someone who paid attention and then made the only choice that her attention allowed her to make in good conscience. And then she had kept making choices one after another, the way you keep walking once you've started, because stopping in the middle is more dangerous than going forward. She was still walking. "Okay," she said. His expression didn't change dramatically, but something in it settled the slight easing of a tension she had not fully clocked as tension until it released. "Okay," he said. She stood up. He stood up. She thought about extending her hand the way she had the first time across this same table, in this same room when everything had been new and enormous, and she hadn't yet understood the shape of what she was agreeing to. She didn't extend her hand this time. She just looked at him, and he looked back, and the understanding that passed between them was more complete than a handshake. She went to the door. She stopped. She turned around. "The nurse," she said, "in the emergency room. The night Danny," she paused. She made a choice too. She probably never knew what it became. Never knew that 6 years later, the person she saved would save someone else, and that someone else would. She stopped. "I just think about that sometimes." Kovac looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the focused attention, not the recalibrating assessment. Something quieter and more private. "So do I," he said. "More than you'd expect." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned and walked out. Renner was in the hallway. He fell into step beside her without being asked the way he always did, and they walked toward the exit together in a silence that had a different quality from any silence they had shared before. Less the silence of 2 people in a working arrangement, more the silence of 2 people who had been through something and come out the other side of it in reasonable condition, and were each processing that fact in their own way. At the outer door, Renner stopped. She stopped. He said, "For what it's worth," he paused. "I was wrong about you needing more time." She looked at him. "You told me that already." "I know," he said. "I wanted to say it again because the first time it was professional. This time it's personal." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. "Thank you, Renner." He nodded back. He opened the door. She walked out into the city. It was a Thursday morning, just past 10, and New York was doing what New York did, moving layered loud in some places, in particular quiet in others, the specific aliveness of a place that had never once in its entire history stopped to ask anyone whether they were ready for what came next. She took the subway. She held the pole. She watched her reflection in the dark window, the way she had 1 week ago when none of this had happened yet, and she had been a woman with a shift to cover and a brother who owed her a croissant. She still had a shift to cover. She got off at her stop. She walked the 4 blocks to her apartment. She unlocked the secondary bolt and then the primary and pushed the door open and stood in the entrance of the space that was exactly as she had left it. Her coffee mug on the counter, her jacket on the hook, the east window latched in the way Kovac had asked her to latch it on a night that now felt like the center of everything. She thought about what came next, not with dread, not with the hollow restlessness of that first sleepless night, with the grounded, clear-eyed steadiness of someone who had looked at the shape of her life, the real shape, all of it, every part she had chosen and every part that had chosen her, and decided that she could carry it. She picked up her phone and called Danny. He picked up on the second rings back from Philadelphia, flower on his hands. From the sound of it, his voice warm and unhurried and entirely himself. "Hey," he said. "You okay?" "I'm good," she said. And she meant it in a way she had not meant anything simple in 8 days. "Come by this week," he said. "I'm making the almond croissants on Saturday. You never miss those." "I'll be there Saturday," she said. She hung up. She set the phone down. She stood in her apartment in the morning light and felt the specific, hard-won piece of a person who had walked through fire and come back knowing exactly who they were. Lena Varelli had started this with nothing but a smell she recognized and a choice she couldn't unmake, and she had ended it with something no one could take from her, the absolute unshakable certainty that when it had mattered most in the darkest and most dangerous rooms she had ever stood in, she had been exactly the person she needed to be.